What up, fishing fans? It's your boy Mad Bear Angler, and this would be my first video for 2022. First and foremost, I would like to greet everyone Happy New Year wherever you are in the world. As of this recording, my country is now under COVID Alert 3. So that means face mask, checkpoints, and heightened security on all business establishments. So here I am in another fishing tutorial here in my room. Sucks. Before we start, just a bit of a disclaimer, everything that you will hear on this video are all my thoughts and opinions on the matter. Should you think otherwise, it's absolutely fine. It's a free world. Let's talk about it in the comment section down below. With that all said and done, let's go ahead into the main topic. Here's my take on an in-depth talk about how to cast further and the things that you have to consider. Probably most of us were taught when we were starting fishing, or probably being taught from a person who's not really technical, that the stronger you swing the rod, the further you can cast. It's really good on paper, but later on I realized that there are mainly two things that affect casting distance: force and friction. So let's start with force. Your main driver in your casting distance is your rod length and your rod tip action. Majority of your casting power really depends on how much your rod bends in accordance to your lure weight, plus a few critical factors which we're going to discuss later on in this video. So why does rod length and rod tip action affects casting? In theory, the longer the rod, the further you can cast. So that's because your rod, assuming this stick is your rod, the longer your rod, the more potential energy it can store for more flinging action. So your fishing rod bends based on how much stress your terminal tackle causes. In your case, it's your lure, how much it weighs. So technically, if you want to make a cast, as shown in this video, I am doing a rolling side cast. You wind up the rod, bending the rod in the process, loading it up. This creates potential energy. Now it becomes kinetic energy whenever you try to swing the rod forward, throwing the lure out forward and pulling the line at the same time. So we're done with force. So let's talk about the other factor that affects casting distance: friction. So what are the other factors in your tackle that affects friction? Your line diameter, not poundage. The thinner your line is, the less surface friction it causes whenever it passes through the rod and or reel line guides. So for example, you're using a 40-pound braid, which is roughly 0.33 mils. Usually what most anglers do is they go down the line poundage to roughly like 30, which is like 0.26 mils. If you want to cast further, what you want to do is either you go down a poundage or you buy a line that is according to your poundage and at the same time it's thin. The problem with that is most of the higher poundage lines with thin diameters, they're pretty expensive. Or if you're fishing open water, you might want to use ×8 braids or ×9 braids. They're way thinner versus their ×4 counterparts. The problem with ×8 is they're not really built for heavy cover fishing like what we do. In some countries like the United States or in Europe, they have line lubrication products. In my case, I just use water. I've seen YouTuber anglers that use hair shampoo and or conditioner to lubricate the line. I don't really use that because they might have some chemical components that can ruin your line. So I'm just sticking with water. Another thing that has friction on it is your reel. To be specific, your spool rotation, spool bearings, braking system, and brake settings. Your bait casting settings defines how your bait casting reel would work. On your bait casting reel, the one that affects your spool rotation would be your braking system and your spool tension knob. If you want your spool to move freely, you need to adjust your spool tension knob. If you want to adjust how fast or slow your spool slows down, you need to check your brake section. The only braking system in your reel that you can technically turn off is if you have a centrifugal braking system. It's literally a braking system. The plastic knobs that are inside your centrifugal braking system force your spool to slow down based on the number of levers touching the spool. Mag brakes, however, you're adjusting how far your magnets are in contact with the spool. So the lower the setting, the further the mag brakes are away from the spool. It still tries to pull your spool via magnetism, so technically your mag brakes are always on. Spinning reel users, you're in luck because you don't have this problem. Because technically spinning reels are just open spools with a line stopper in the form of a bail arm. On the other hand, bait casting reels are literally machines with a spool on it. If you want to have an open spool with your bait casting reel, similar to the spinning reel, your main goal is to achieve the 0-0 setting. So what is that? An open spool with no brakes. That is possible. It will take a lot of practice, but be warned, if you do this setting, you're very prone to the dreaded bird's nest. Another factor that you need to consider is the lure you're using, lure aerodynamics, and some internal components. If I want to cast as far as I can, I normally use lures that don't have that much moving parts. Well, best example are frogs. So what I have here is a Nobi 18-gram hollow body frog, which you can see here. Always remember that each rod is rated with a certain lure rate that it can, quote-unquote, catapult. Technically, the heavier the lure is, the more your rod bends, creating potential energy. So if you're using a medium heavy rod and you're trying to cast like, let's say a 2.5 gram lure, you can technically cast it, but it's not as far as whenever you try to cast a lure that is optimized for your rod rating. Let's say 15 grams. Going under or higher the lure rating of your rod is not really advisable due to the fact that your rod may not flex that much to generate energy, or the lure rate may exceed your rod's rating, therefore causing microfracture or worse, rod breaking. The internal construction of your lure plays a part whenever your lure is airborne. Some lures have a weight transfer system that kicks in whenever you try to cast and whenever the lure tries to fall down. The other factors that you need to consider is your technique. The technique that you need to learn is you need to learn when to cast after your rod reaches the maximum bend, plus when to let the line go after that big swing. Another thing that you need to consider whenever you want to cast far is the wind conditions. For the optimum and least casting effort, try to cast on a tailwind. A tailwind means that you are casting with the wind. If you're casting against the wind, there will be a lot of wind resistance, therefore causing a lot of drag, versus you casting tailwind. Tailwind generates more lift, especially if your lure is aerodynamic. It adds lift to your lure, so as much as possible, and if you can, always cast tailwind side. So again, just to recap, here are the factors that affect casting distance. So that will be number 1, your rod length and rod tip action. Number 2, your line diameter. Number 3, your reel and reel settings. Number 4, your lure and lure design. Number 5, your technique. And number 6, wind conditions. There you have it. That is my take on things that you need to consider if you want to know more how to cast farther. Wherever you are in the world, always remember that you need to fish carefully and legally. That means you need to abide by local laws and regulations. If you like this video, don't forget to click on like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to click on that bell notification icon so you won't miss on the next video. Alright, so once again, I'm your boy Mad Bear Angler. Peace, tight lines, till next video, stay safe and take care.